So here we are, going to focus our attention on Deming's The New Economics chapters. What are we on? Chapter 8 and 9,
8 and 9.
which go pretty well together. I remember Don Wheeler, who has written some really good things to help management understand how they can collect data and make use of it. And he claims that statistical process control is not about control and it's not about statistics. So he offers that we ought to call the charts, instead of control charts, process behavior charts. And the point is looking at the charts to see if the process is behaving predictably or not. I like that idea. It's not a control chart and it's not about statistics.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea, because even in the book here, Deming actually really refers to these things more about being a way to manage, and ultimately is not necessarily reacting to what's in the chart as per se the results, but really looking at the influences on the process or the system that is under review. So I think just adopting that sort of lens, kind of contradicts how traditionally management typically thinks. I think it demonstrated well in the red bead experiment, in the sense that when persons judging the results, they're really just focusing on the outcome, but not the system causing the results. And I think that shift really kind of shifts you away to there are some other things that may be happening that lead into the variation. I think also the idea from Schubert is also very important to look at, in the sense of the economics, that this is really about the whole economics of it as well,
Yes.
because quite often persons want to improve on things, when it might not even be probably economically prudent to do so. So this is about helping persons to make decisions on whether the investment into change or into improving is actually worth it.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people evidently haven't recognized that Schuhart wasn't using statistics to determine what he was doing. He was he was using empirical evidence that if he chased anything, only things that were 4 sigma away, he would miss a whole bunch of things he ought to see. And if he chased things that were only a half a sigma off, he'd be tampering with the system. And he decided, based on his empirical evidence, that using 3 sigma as the limits for investigating whether or not you have a special cause was the most effective way to use your money, which has nothing to do with statistics.
And that I think that is why we typically say that the persons who promote the Six Sigma miss the point, in the sense that
Yes.
they actually tampering with the system. Um, and quite often they really adding no real value by doing
Yeah.
so. In fact, you might actually be taking the system off of its capability or tolerance by over adjusting and overreacting.
Yeah. And I like he reminds us, I can't remember if it's in the chapter 8 or chapter 9, he reminds us that for him, the most important use of the concept between special causes and common causes is in the management of people. And yet, what I see with companies that decide they're going to produce control charts is they're not producing those control charts on anything except factory kind of things, sort of, that give you figures. They're not using it for anything else. In fact, he says that in, I think, chapter 2. He says, we've got a technique that we can use, but it's only applied to 3% of what we do.
But I think what happened to a lot of the messages in this chapter get lost on persons, because they may think that it only applies to some production systems, manufacturing, or they may not realize that it applies to much more. It could apply in Nicole case, for instance, to student attendance,
Mhm.
or student scores, and persons may not necessarily look at those areas because there's a sort of a probably how to put it. People feel sort of afraid of maths, and they get lost, they get carried away in the whole process of, oh, a control chart or a bar chart or a histogram, or in the whole, they just get caught up in that whole process, not recognizing, well, what's the purpose.
Yeah, I've used control charts on all kinds of things. My blood pressure. I years ago, when Rocketdyne was trying to emphasize safety because they had a really nasty accident and some people died, and the executives had law enforcement in their offices pulling files to go find out what the hell happened. And so they got more serious about safety. And so I started plotting the number of OSHA recordables every month, because the company would report it out and then say, it's better than last month or worse than last month, as if that told them anything. And so I started showing them the control charts and said, hey, it's not really any different from last month. Yes, it's lower. It doesn't mean anything. Or yes, it's higher, and it doesn't mean anything. And they did a good job over the years of moving away from chasing every individual thing and every individual and looking at the system. When I first started charting, they were having more than six recordables, OSHA recordables, for every 20,000 man hours. And it took them almost 15 years, but they got it down under one, down to about one half. But it took a long time and a lot of work, and they're still continuing the work to keep it down at that level. And that they always wanted to show progress because they were so proud of their progress. So every month that something went down, they claimed victory, and I had to send them a note and said, "Look at the control chart again. Doesn't mean anything, guys."
No, I think people be so desperate to always think. That's why I call that misuse of the statistics. You see the crime statistics come across like that, right? True. Everybody always talking about, 10% reduction, 40% reduction,
Yeah.
as opposed to January last year to this year, and
Mhm.
all sorts of nonsense. Not looking at the changes in the frame, nothing. So I don't know. There's a lot of work actually has to be done, even in this whole thing about communicating data is a that's a whole other kind of challenge that we have.
And recognizing what you're trying to do, it's the, the percentage of people, even ones who use control charts, that I found recognize what the purpose of the control chart is not up in the 80 or 90%. They're not recognizing the purpose of the control chart is to tell them whether the process is stable. And they try to do all kinds of other stuff with it because they got this chart there, so they want to go take action. And said, guys, if you don't like the result, that's okay. what in the system are you going to change to get a different result? A lower average, a narrower range of distribution, whatever it is, it's a system thing. So you can't be looking at one event and deciding what to do.
That overreaction also is a kind of psychological sort of behavior that comes in. And because of that too, you find that persons may distort the numbers rather than actually report.
Yeah,
You
yeah, that's
understand?
true.
People try rather hide information rather than report, or there is a big saying that, oh, instead of reporting it on this month, like let's say something happened at the last day of the month, I transfer it into next month. So there are a lot of psychological things that actually goes into the data, and that's why you also have to look at it for what it is and not make all of these other assumptions and put additional meaning. And then people also like to feel like they're doing something. So doing nothing doesn't really feel like doing
Yeah,
something, but sometimes doing nothing might be the best course of action that you could actually take. Just observing, continue to observe is sometimes the best action that you could take. But I don't know, is there something in the psychology that says that, oh, we must react on every single data point?
yeah. It's up from last week. Something's different. Let's go fix it. So what? That's and you talk about the psychological effect. And I remember he's got an example in here of at some company, shoe company, the belief was, and Deming says whether or not it's true, the belief was that the guy in charge of the company was going to close the place down if the defect rate ever went above 10%. So lo and behold, it sometimes got up close, but it never got above 10%. But when somebody with some brains looked at the data, they found out it was some of the data was fictitious because it didn't behave in a random manner. But again, Deming talks about people behaving rationally given their perception of the situation. This inspector perceived she was saving jobs by not reporting when the defect rate went above 10%. A perfectly rational decision.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what happens when you start using or misusing numbers is people will do stuff to make the numbers be what they're supposed to be, no matter what, it screws up.
We have examples of looking at data this year from last year for student attendance, and they're like, see guys, these things that you did the same thing as last year, that's what's changing it. It's like, no, that's not how that works.
Yeah, that's
like we did not change the system, we changed the students in the system, and that is it.
That's interesting too, because when you've got something like a control chart and you've got data on your turnover rate, instead of thinking, well, 3 people quit in the last 2 weeks, something weird's going on, you start, if you had the data, you could say, well, is this a predictable system in the first place? Mm-hmm. And if it's predictable and you don't like the level of turnover, you need to change something in your system that helps keep people around. But studying one case at a time, or when 3 in 3 weeks happen, isn't going to get you anywhere.
Even in chapter, was that what? This was what chapter and Shuhat, and that was chapter 8. I think even this whole idea of who's responsible for action,
Yes.
and then even the reminder on the efforts on the effects, like if it's a matter of a special cause, that whole table just reminding you of if you take particular action in relation to a special cause, the mistakes, if you make the mistakes of reacting to a special cause as a common cause or vice versa, just that reminder I think is actually so important for managers and leaders to always have a reminder upfront, because that is again the same kind of reaction. Like, we always reacting to every single point, but we really don't take the time to understand what is really if the system is stable or unstable, if it behaving in a predictable manner, where do we really need to apply our efforts to bring about a change? It's such an
Yeah,
important.
and Wheeler points this out. The control charts are action limits, but they're not a guarantee that when you find a data point outside the limits or you find a pattern in the data, it's not a guarantee there's a fire. That's those looking at those charts are a smoke alarm. And when you see a pattern, you ought to go look for a fire. If you see a data point outside a limit, you ought to go look for a fire. So it's not a guarantee that when you get a data point that's outside the limits that there's some special cause acting. But the reason you might want to react is until you know for sure that there's no special cause acting, you don't know whether the system's going to go back to what it used to do or whether this same kind of a data point is going to arise again. The system's unpredictable until you either decide there was no special cause, some evidence, or you find the special cause and eliminate it. And you're right. Psychologically, no action seems like the wrong thing to do. I look at the way we do MRs. When a part doesn't meet the requirements, you write it up and you submit it and everybody reviews it. Then they go say, well, what corrective action we're going to take? And a whole bunch of the time, if you bother to collect the data, you're going to find out the part doesn't meet the spec, but you're pretty much guaranteed by the data you see that 5% of your parts aren't going to meet the spec. Well, there's not a lot to do. The system's predictable. If you don't like it, you're going to have to change something in the system. Messing around with trying to fix each one of those parts that went bad, well, it was 5 out of 100. The other 95 are fine. And if you start messing with the 5, the other 95 are going to get screwed up. So it's hard for especially management, but it's hard for people not to take action when they see something they believe is a signal. But the signal is go look. Looking may not end up driving you to take action. It might lead you to understand what's going on, and that may or may not lead to action.
It might be that the requirements were such that the system could never
Exactly.
never ever meet those requirements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly functioning system, and it will perfectly generate 5 defects out of 100 parts. And here's the other thing. Since its process behavior is perfectly stable, you can decide whether or not you want to try to change something in the system to make it better, or you can decide it's cheaper for me to fix these 5 individual parts out of 100 than it is to mess with the system.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a legitimate decision. But if you don't have the data, you don't even get a chance to make that decision.
Something that I actually didn't really see before that I actually saw in reviewing the chapter this time. This whole in the efforts directed, right? In the same table. Before I just used to look at it as the 2 mistakes, right? But is only on this occasion I really looked at it in terms of the cause system, common cause.
Yes.
I didn't really look at it as the core system before. Like I was reading it all the time and I never really saw that it was really like a system of a core system in terms of the common cause. So they say that if the actions now directed towards the that's supposed to be directed towards the common cause are treated as if it's a special cause disappointment
Yeah.
and vice versa. So, I mean, it's so interesting that to me it also kind of speaks to this need to look at the system of causes carefully before directing your efforts. It's so important to slow down. Don't to take a pause. Don't just rush into
Yeah.
action, as you were saying, that you need to know, well, what is really causing um whatever. Like, you see the point, don't just go by the point. If you feel, well, something lies outside, don't immediately think that because something lies outside is a special cause, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's got the chart where some company their fire insurance was going to go up. And so he figured 22, he got the data from them and plotted everything over time. And frankly, with that data and an insurance company that has an actuary person who knows anything about data, they can they can set the prices to get their money. They don't have to threaten to cancel the guy's insurance. Look, it's a perfectly stable system. It's going to run somewhere in here. So set your prices to charge him so that when it runs in there, you don't go broke. Yeah, that chart, he doesn't have a figure name for it, but that the effects and the good and disappointment,
Hmm.
common cause, special cause, that's a good chart. Yes, I like
Another
that.
another interesting insight was even how the chart is not to be used to set objectives or targets. And I think even the example that was kind of brought across was this whole question of the fires. And I think the statement was made, what the best way to fight fires would be not to have any. And this would be an impossible numerical goal. So we
Yeah,
might settle for something less, namely like reduction in the number of fires. And the fire department could improve their efficiency by learning whether the number of fires. So basically you have to really assess rather than just setting these arbitrary type goals, type targets, type things that you can't possibly meet, or you can meet by just distorting, just distorting how you communicate your information.
yeah, and that's why I think when Deming he talked in profound knowledge, that whole idea that you have to understand the variation. It's and what he means by understanding variation is simply look at the variation you got and decide whether it's common cause or special cause. That's the understanding you need. And if you have that understanding, you can go deeper into it. What are we going to do about it? But you need that understanding first. If you can't tell whether the data is common cause or special cause, you have no idea what action to even think about.
Mhm.
I'm still of the impression that a whole bunch of the systems that we run in organizations are perfectly designed to give us the results, including all the ugly ones. And yet we think all the ugliness that happens comes from a special cause. And we're busy chasing down that cause, not saying, well, we got a really we got a racing automobile that sucks and no number of changing out various parts in that is going to give us a good vehicle. We need to look at this thing and decide how to redesign it. Oh, yeah, this is the chapter where he introduces his his concept of a hack. A hack is somebody who believes he has knowledge, or he may not even believe he has the knowledge, but but, but goes ahead and says, "This is the way it is, and let me teach you." And Deming says has the beginner is entitled to a master for a teacher. A hack can do incredible damage. And what I found really interesting is years ago, Al Viswanathan, at one of these sessions we were having like today, asked the question that's a great question. How do we know we're not hacks? My answer is if you're okay with asking the question and considering the possibility, you're probably not a hack. And in fact, in this chapter, maybe it's the other chapter. No, I think it's this one. Yeah, it's not the funnel. It's this chapter where he says that there, somebody he asked how they calculated the limit, and he was told they didn't do any calculation. They just drew it where they thought it should be. And he said, that's you don't get to do that. That's crazy. And then somebody's maybe who he was talking to sent him a note and said, no, some of these books tell us that's what we're supposed to do. And so she kept sending him titles of books that said that's what you're supposed to do. And he started looking at them and said, I know some of these people. I didn't realize they were hacked. I said, and he says, I want to make it clear that's wrong. I don't want any guilt by association because I happen to know those people.
So they were creating a best fit line.
Yeah, evidently.
For possibly all the special causes.
I'm drawing specifications on your chats and all kind of.
If this were complex math and required solving several differential equations, I could understand why they might want to not do that. It's not very difficult. You just put the data down there and you can there's a formula, you put the numbers in and the average shows up and 3 standard deviations shows up. Holy cow, it can't get much easier. I didn't see anything else here that I didn't find any new this time through. Chris found something new though, so that's good.
But if I looked at chapter 9 with the funnel, what I found very interesting is, within the different rules, you'll find that the rules also carry a lot of practices that we commonly do, and we like, let's say you go to a training and people tell you that, oh, they're going to use the survey at the end of the training to make improvements to the next time that we're going to run this, for instance. So if you actually reacting to every piece of feedback that you get in a survey, you'll find yourself in the very next survey, and then you're reacting. So leading to the overreaction. And there's so many things, in these rules that you see every day that where we overreacting, whether it be from the drug thing and crime and all of that because of the greater than last month or 2 more than last year and all of that kind of misuse of data.
Yeah, and there are a couple of things that we seem to do wrong or seem like we ought to get smarter about, and one of them, I think, as you say, is when you ask students who you have just changed what you should change in whatever you did, you're asking people who are relatively inexperienced and ignorant to tell you what you should be doing. And those are the wrong people to ask. So there's that problem. And the next problem is reacting to every bump, every blip, if you had 15 people in the class and 12 of them had comments, you go change 12 things, and that next time around, whatever you do is likely to get different results and possibly way worse results. And it's back to one of those things where you can get comments from people without taking any action. It's not a requirement. I had some people who were trained to me in the Kepner-Trago decision-making problem-solving techniques. And we were supposed to do a presentation of one of their modules, and the rest of the class would sort of evaluate what you did and give you feedback. And he made it very clear, and I thought it was a great line. He says, the only acceptable response to feedback is thank you. Because as soon as you start saying, no, I was trying to do this, no, and start making excuses, so just take the feedback, say thank you, go over in your corner and decide what it means and whether you need to do anything. But the only correct response to feedback is thank you. I love it. Thank you, I got the feedback. What are you going to do? I'm going to go look at the feedback.
That's kind of what I did for my performance review this year. I was like, thanks.
Yes.
Because I just had my like second thing after my
You're ready to
observation.
argue.
Yeah. Are there any questions about anything? And I said, well, and mind you, I didn't really read it, but I said the one thing that was interesting that you pointed out was I should look at what's called aggressive monitoring, which I went and looked at the definition of this. And at first I was like, so you want me to yell at children and be like, come on, let's do this. I'm not a drill instructor. And I was like, I think I've also hit my point in my teaching career where everything just gets labeled and they add one more new thing to whatever this technique is. So thanks. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Which I thought that Kepner-Trago guy, when he said that, I just said, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working with trying to teach people things, whether a teacher or whether you're a soccer coach or a basketball coach or anything, whenever trying to do that, I find it interesting that a whole bunch of people, I see it when we play, even when we're not playing a league game, we're just having a kick around, that people will complain about their teammates. A teammate makes a mistake and you say, what the heck did you do that for? And I always turn to the guy who's saying that and say, he did it on purpose. So what are you complaining about? The guy made a mistake. So that's life.
It happens.
And Deming says that in an earlier chapter. Once somebody has reached a stable state in whatever you're training them in, further training is of no use, and calling attention to them having made a mistake is distracting and of no use. You've got their performance level. That's what it's going to be. If you don't like that, you have to change something about the system. And calling their attention to the fact that they made a mistake is just distracting. They're going to start changing things all the time. And so the stability is going to go away. I
think that is one of the things that the funnel experiment really emphasizes, that to really bring about change is really about changing the system, and not adjusting with every ball drop. Anytime you adjust, you tamper. And I think even some of the examples of the rule not only help to make it clear, but it also show how much of that tampering actually takes place as
Yeah, it's just
somewhat
normal.
good leadership and good leadership, in the world, today. So there's just like so many examples of over adjusting and probably even overspending as a result. Um, and as you tamper, the costs go up.
Yes,
You're adjusting every time, and each time your costs go up, you know, um, your results get worse each and every time. And we doing this, some probably doing this on a daily basis. On a daily basis, they may be adjusting on a daily basis, probably several times.
yep.
So you're actually managing daily by tampering. Your style of managing is tampering. It might be
So
better to call it tampering than management.
somebody who's a flyer told me that there's a difficulty when people are first learning to fly because they'll be flying the plane in the direction they're headed, and then because of the wind or because they move the the steering wheel, if you will, enough, the plane will start drifting. And when they notice it's drifting, they correct it, try a correction, but it takes time for the correction to happen. And they get nervous because it's not happening fast enough. So they turn more. So now it starts swinging and then they straighten it out again. But because they've been turning, it doesn't straighten out right away and it keeps going. So they turn left more to get it back in the center. And over time, the swings get so bad that they're going to end up crashing. And it takes time for them to learn not to react until they're getting a special cause, a signal that something's really wrong. And then when you react, don't expect immediate reaction to what you do. You have to wait and see whether what you did is going to give you the result you want.
Did he
I
say
find
how
that
long it
fascinating.
takes? Like, how long does it take once you tamper with the system for it to become stable, where you can look at the data and decide if what you did was correct or not in that plan, do,
Yeah.
study, act thing?
Yeah, it's it, you know,
You're
what
going to give me a Bill Bellows answer, aren't you? It
well,
depends.
yeah, as Bill said, the answer to the most important question are it depends. But yeah, that no, you're absolutely right. Because now if you're doing something like the guy that had the ingot, who if it weighed too much, he'd slice off more next time. And if it didn't weigh enough, he wouldn't slice off as much. That's pretty immediate because it's one unit at a time. So you can tell that. But you're right, a lot of other things, you make the change. How long do you have to wait to decide everything's okay? And theoretically, you're going to have to make that decision on your own gut feel, hunch, and instinct because there's no answer. In fact, you could have made the change, and and things got better, and you could leave it like that, and it could get better for a year, and then it could get worse, and you're going to think that what you did made it better, but the fact may be that what you did didn't do a damn thing, but what was causing your difficulty went away and didn't come back for a year. It's there's no that's here after they change something saying we're going to start doing it this way now, they want to judge the effectiveness of that change. And I keep telling them over and over again, there's no way you can do that. They say, well, yeah, we can see if it happens again. And I can say, even if it doesn't happen again, you don't have proof that it's because of what you did. All you know is you did something and what you didn't like went away. So, okay, you can assume that what you did made it go away, but you don't have any evidence.
I think when you look at the additional notes on tampering, I think they're really important to pay attention to those. Where you recognize too is you have to one recognize you're tampering. So as you go
Yes.
through the rules, you may not even recognize that you're tampering. So you have to firstly recognize that you're tampering before you could even change the system. Then you also have to recognize whether your system is your process is stable or unstable,
Yeah.
right? So as you go through, you first probably have to start back with the recognition of stability or instability before before reacting.
Yeah.
I think that is what is also I think that is part of the lesson. And then fundamentally, that true change going to come from changing the design of the system altogether. So the way how your system design is going to give you the results based on whatever you're using. You could, because they also said you could have lowered the thing. You could have probably not use a funnel. You could probably use something else. You could use a matter stick. So you had to think now as to how do you design your system to minimize the instability or unpredictability in the system. But the important thing is to recognize if you do, if you're over adjusting, if you're tampering, um, and you have tools in which to do that, which is like the control chart and the other um, tools. Important too in these notes is it's important to also define what improvement means.
Ah,
So you have
yes.
to actually have an operational definition of improvement
Yep.
for yourself because you know improvement can mean different things in different circumstances. In this instance here, it would have meant reduction of variation, you know, and so on. So, you know, narrower control limits and so on. You got to know what does it depends on what it means in your situation.
Yeah, and then the next part of that is appreciating a system, which means you changed part of this system and you believe the narrower range of variation or the movement and average that you made is good. It's good locally. The question is, did it help the system or is it screwing up somebody else somewhere else? And that's part of what the evaluation has to be when you go into your plan, do, study, act cycle.
Yeah,
I
because you
also
could
like,
make it narrow on your side, but then because of that narrow variation, yeah, affect somebody's
yep,
system down the road.
I like when you talked about design, Chris. I'm surprised Deming never mentioned it because I think he was familiar with Russ Akoff's idea. He has this this robust design idea where what you do you take the system you've got. If it's acting stably, so now you can make an improvement because it's predictable. So and you will have some idea if the change made a difference. If the thing's acting in an unpredictable way, when you make a change, you have no idea whether that had any effect. But what you do is you presume the system you have in place was blown up. It's gone. None of it's around. Now, what are you going to put in its place if you had no constraint on resources? The only constraints are you can't, you can't invent stuff. If you know something might exist soon, okay, we got this technology coming up. Maybe we can include that in our design. But you can't use things like, oh, well, in our design, we're going to include mental telepathy. No, you don't have any evidence that's good. But you take the thing you've got and you blow it up and you say, it's gone. Forget that. Don't try to adapt that. Take that. And then the constraints are it's got to fit into the system that you've got, the system that's out there, the system of which it's a subsystem of. It's got to fit into that, and it's got to be able to adapt to changes that will happen in that system over time. So that start starting with blowing it up. He calls it idealized design. If I could do anything I want and I had all the resources I wanted, what would I do instead of what I'm doing? And he offers that we don't ask that question often enough. If I could do anything I want, what would I do? And if you don't know what the hell you do when you can do anything you want, you're kind of in trouble for making an improvement. And frequently, when you do that idealized design, you come up with something that clearly you're not going to be able to do right away, but you can do some of the things right away as you're headed towards where you want to get, was to get all of those things done, and you can set up a timeline for getting it done. But yeah, you're right, Chris. It's when you get down to the common cause variation, you're now into redesign. Well, redesign to what? What do you want it to look like in the future?
I think that's why so often we think that the improvement will simply come by using technology.
Yeah.
So we just automate probably they say bad design.
Yeah.
And we merely make matters worse. And these days they're actually forcing you to take some bad designs too, you know.
Well, and Deming talks of that as one of the examples of tampering, where you change a design without going back and looking at the purpose of the original design. What was the original design trying to do? And what do I want to do differently to make that same thing happen? But if all you do is take the existing design and tweak it without asking yourself the question, what were we trying to accomplish? What was the purpose in the first place? Then you're tampering. So if you decide what the purpose is in the first place, and you ask yourself the question, what alternate ways can we do that? Now you can start looking at things. But if you just grab the first alternate that comes up and mess with it, you're not really doing justice, and you're tampering. But I'm really good at tampering, so I can do it, and everything will be okay. Because I'm special. I didn't see anything else. Oh, yeah, at the tag end of the chapter, he shows illustrations of the rules of the funnel by taking the data from his Red Beads chapter, the individual data, and adjusting it with rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, and rule 4, and show you, and it shows very clearly that rule 1, which was just use the target and drop the marble each time, is much better than rule 2, 3, or 4.
Doing nothing was better than
Yeah. Doing nothing could be better. And then
some
there's
people need to
there's
learn
the
that
thing
too.
that Deming emphasizes over and over again. The thing you're looking at, the process or subsystem you're looking at, you may be able to make it better, but the cost of making it better may not be worth it. It's an economic decision. And just because you can make something better doesn't mean you should.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're right, Chris, the idea of defining what when you say better, what you mean by that. How am I going to know what's better? What's my definition of better? What does better look like?
I will tell you, in the education world, it looks like uniformity.
Yeah.
Student output, teacher
Yeah.
output.
That's something Alfie Cohn, no, it was Peter Senge. That's something Peter Senge brought it to the attention of teachers. Had maybe 300 teachers in the audience, and it's on a video, and he's talking to them, and he asked them what school was about, and they're shouting out answers like learning and doing this and doing that, and then he said, no, I'm getting down to the fundamentals. That first day when you go in, what's going on? What do you very soon learn that you can and can't do? Oh, well, you can't be in the hallway without a hall pass. Oh, you can't talk when the teacher's talking. Oh, you learn all these things. And he says, and oh, you got to stand in line to get to stuff. And he says, yes, it's about conformity. It's not about learning. It's just, learning is a side issue that might happen, but it's about conformity. I said, wow, yeah. Which is really, when you're talking about trying to get innovation and people to just try all kinds of different and new things, conformity is not helpful. It's you want people who are going to come up with crazy ideas, absolutely crazy ideas. And crazy ideas, there's nothing wrong with a crazy idea. You can take that crazy idea and maybe it in and of itself is crazy, but that idea gives you some insight into something you could do that would be beneficial. And that's why using the 6 thinking hats when you're trying to generate these things is really useful, because all kinds of stuff crops up, stuff that you would never try to do, but it leads to another idea that's very valuable. So,
Right.
And conformity doesn't lead to that. It's not that conformity doesn't have its purposes. We have a lot of conformity when it comes to time of day and speed on the highway and a whole bunch of other stuff, and I think it's valuable. But if what you're trying to do is look at a system and decide whether or not you can redesign it and make it better, you don't want conformity. That gets you nowhere. Conformity doesn't lead to innovation. In fact, Nicole, some of those kids you're working with are the most innovative around, because they come up with all kinds of ways
Wacky
to
stuff.
get around all the rules and regulations.
Oh, yes, they do. And those are the ones that constantly get in trouble and are doing things a little outside the box. I'm like, you're gonna run the world one day.
Yeah.
It's not the kid with the highest grade.
No.
Okay, they may get into a fancy pants school, but they're not going to be figuring out what the system is and how to look around the system, and
Yep.
find the mistakes.
Yeah, creativity, and the school system doesn't realize it does it. It brings out a lot of creativity in the kids, but not in a way that is productive to them learning stuff that's going to be valuable to them later on. They learn how to manipulate the system, which could be valuable, but that's not what the school's trying to teach them. It's trying to teach them that you're supposed to color within the lines. What are you doing coloring outside the lines? What the hell's the matter with you?
Sit at your desk for 8 hours a day, and that's how you learn, not getting out and exploring the world and other things. Yeah.
Russ pointed that out too. I found it interesting years ago, maybe the early 90s, when I heard Russ first speak, and he talked about that whole idea of the conformity and how you can get trapped in things, and that when when you're looking at the system, when you're looking at something that's a system, you've got to ask yourself questions like why? Why this? Why that? Why? Curiosity and asking why all the time is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, kids at 2 and 3 years old learn how to do that. But boy, in school, you ask why very much, and they're all over your ass. What do you mean why? Because that's the way it is. Why is it that way? Because we've been doing it that way for 52 years. So, well, if you've been doing something the same way for 52 years, you're probably doing it wrong.
Well, now with Google, that makes it a little easier. If like, go ahead and look it up.
Yeah.
See the history of this
Go see what's been.
methodology or whatever it is. And yeah.
Yeah. There's value in being able to sort a whole bunch of data from the past, and it can offer you something useful to the future. But just the data and information alone isn't going to do it. The AI thing itself isn't going to come up with a new design. It'll show you a bunch of things that were done in the past, might even be able to tell you how to combine some of those things, but that's a very limited way of making improvements. It's not
Right.
It doesn't show what Russ calls it. It doesn't have a way to display wisdom, meaning if I do this, here's what's going to happen. Here are the effects I can expect to see out into the future. So no amount of information does that.
Not a predictor.
Yep. You can predict when you use AI, you're going to get a lot of data, and you can also predict some of it's going to be very wrong. But you have the ability to decide not to accept it, use it like feedback. Thank you, and then use what you want and ignore what you don't want. So I don't have any other wisdom on these kinds of things. We got in chapter 10, Deming introduces Taguchi and the loss function, which I think is a huge thing for people to grasp. It's also a chapter that attacks some of the hacks Deming has seen by saying at the tag end that I think he's told us that Wheeler said it. Did he tell us Wheeler said it? Yeah.
That's Jones.
Conformance to specification, zero defects, Six Sigma quality, and other nostrums, he calls them, which is quack medicine, all miss the point. So stated by Donald J. Wheeler, 1992. Well, all right. Well, I'm good at getting back together and looking at, well, I want to do two things. Look at chapter 10, because that introduces Taguchi and some new stuff. But I also want to go back to chapter 4, which is sort of the center of this, since it's the system of profound knowledge we're looking at. So let's do 10 and 4 next week. And I'll post this. Usually they get it to me within a day or two and I can post it. So I was a little late this week, but I'll post it. Where's the button that says, oops, that's not the right button. There we go. Record. Stop recording. I have stopped recording. So now you can say bad things. Like I went back, I saw something yesterday or the day before, and I was just looking at what it said. Oh, I know. Some commander told the troops that that Trump was appointed by God and they needed to go forth and convert the rest of the world. This is a commander telling the armed services this, and I looked at that and said, it's just like the damn Crusades from
Oh,
1,000 years ago. We're sending in the Christians to save everybody in the terrible, horrendous Middle East. I said, holy cow. It's 900 years later and we're still stuck in that. What the hell?
so true.
Oh, well. That's that. I think it's the Ken Burns, the guy that does really good documentaries, said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And all I got to say is this is a rhyme of the Crusades, as near as I can tell, at least for that commander who's talking to the troops. Oh, well.
Jeez.
No account.
The best part of that is that they say that it's the usher in Jesus.
Yeah. I also can't think of who. I remember it was attributed to Einstein, but it doesn't sound like Einstein at all. But the comment is only two things are infinite: the universe and man's stupidity. And I'm not sure about the universe.
I was watching some TV show and one of the characters was like, stupidity is a spectrum. And I was like, that is so profound. It is.
Yes. Yes. How stupid do you want to be?
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
Yeah, see you guys next week.
Here.
What happened to Jonathan? I see Jonathan in 2 weeks.
Let's see. I got a button here that ends this. There, end.
Bye, everybody.